Every night, millions of people step into the back seat of a stranger's car and trust an app to take them home safely. Rideshare services have become such a normal part of life that most of us don't think twice before tapping a button and waiting on the sidewalk for a driver we've never met. Most rides are quiet, uneventful, and quickly forgotten. But every once in a while, something about a ride feels wrong. A passenger who doesn't speak, a driver who takes a road that isn't on the map, or a destination that shouldn't exist at all. Tonight, I'm sharing several unsettling rideshare stories from drivers and passengers who say one ordinary ride changed how they see the road at night forever. The last ride of the night. My name is Daniel. I'm 32 and I live in Columbus, Ohio. For the past 2 years, I've been driving for a rideshare app in the evenings after finishing my regular job at a warehouse distribution center. It started as a way to earn some extra money when rent went up, but I ended up enjoying it more than I expected. Most nights were predictable. I'd pick up college students heading downtown, people coming back from work, or travelers needing a ride from the airport. Nothing exciting, but that's exactly how I liked it. If you drive long enough, you start to develop a routine. Mine was simple. I'd log on around 7 p.m., drive until about midnight, and then head home. The late hours could bring in better fares, but I tried not to stay out too late. Driving tired wasn't worth the risk. One Friday night last October, though, I decided to break that rule. It had been a slow evening, and I was still about $40 short of my usual goal. Around 2:10 in the morning, I was about to log off when a new ride request popped up. The pickup location was behind a Walmart about 10 minutes away. Normally, I would have ignored it. Parking lots that late at night tend to attract weird situations. But the fare estimate looked good, and I figured it would be my last ride of the night. So I accepted. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was almost completely empty. The store had already closed, and the only lights came from the tall lamps scattered across the asphalt. I parked near the pickup pin and waited. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone walking slowly across the lot toward my car. It was a man wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. Even under the bright lights, I couldn't see his face clearly. He opened the rear passenger door and slid into the seat behind me. "Daniel," he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. "That's me." He didn't say anything else. Usually, passengers confirm their destination, or at least say hello, but he just sat there. After a moment, the app chimed and displayed the route. The destination was about 20 minutes away, somewhere on the outskirts of the city. "All right," I said, putting the car into drive. "We'll be there in about 20 minutes. No response. In the rearview mirror, I could see him sitting perfectly still, staring out the side window. At first, I assumed he was just tired, but after 10 minutes of driving, something started to feel off. The roads became darker as we left the city. Streetlights were farther apart, and the houses were spaced out along long stretches of empty road. I glanced in the mirror again. The man hadn't moved. He wasn't looking at his phone either, just staring out into the darkness like he was watching something outside. The GPS voice broke the silence. "Turn right in 1 mile." I followed the directions. The road we turned onto was narrower, surrounded by trees on both sides. It wasn't unusual for the outskirts of Columbus, but it felt strange being out there that late. Another minute passed. Then the GPS said something that made me frown. Continue for 3 miles. But according to the map on my screen, the road ended in less than a mile. I slowed down slightly. Maybe the map hadn't updated. I kept driving. The pavement gradually turned into rough gravel. My headlights illuminated tall trees and uneven ground on both sides of the road. At that point, I finally spoke. "Hey," I said, glancing in the mirror. "Are you sure this address is right?" No answer. I tried again. "Sir." Still nothing. That's when I realized something strange. The rear seat looked empty. I blinked and adjusted the mirror. The seatbelt hung loosely against the seat. No passenger. For a second, I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. I immediately pulled the car to a stop and turned around. "Hello," I called out. I called. There was no one in the back. My heart started pounding. I know what you're probably thinking. Maybe he got out earlier without me noticing. But that wasn't possible. The car doors make a loud sound when they open, and I hadn't stopped the car since leaving the Walmart parking lot. I checked the passenger door anyway. It was still locked. I grabbed my phone and looked at the app. The ride was still active. Passenger Michael. Pickup location Walmart parking lot. Destination the road I was currently on. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then the GPS voice spoke again. "You have arrived." But when I looked ahead, all I saw was a dirt clearing surrounded by trees. No houses, no buildings, nothing. Just darkness. At that point, I ended the ride and drove back toward the main road as fast as I could. The strange thing is, the app still charged the ride. It even asked me to rate the passenger. I gave him 5 stars, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. But I'll tell you one thing. Since that night, I never accept rides after 1 a.m. And I definitely don't pick up passengers from empty parking lots anymore. The ride that was never requested. My name is Marcus, and I'm 28. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've been driving rideshare part-time for about 3 years now. Unlike some drivers, I actually prefer working the late hours. Phoenix stays busy long after midnight, especially on weekends. Bars close around 2, and that's when rides start flooding in. Most of the passengers are just people trying to get home safely after a long night out. I usually bring a large coffee and settle in for a few hours of driving between midnight and 3 in the morning. Most nights blur together. Same streets, same music playing quietly through the speakers, same routine of picking people up and dropping them off. But there's one ride I'll never forget. It started on a Tuesday night in early spring. I remember that part because Tuesdays are usually slow, and I was surprised when a request popped up just after 1:30 a.m. The passenger's name on the app was Michael B. The pickup location was about 8 minutes away, in a quiet residential neighborhood. Nothing unusual about that. When I arrived, though, something felt strange right away. The street was almost completely dark. Only a few porch lights were on, and most of the houses looked like everyone had already gone to sleep. The pickup pin was sitting directly in front of a small one-story house with faded white siding. I parked at the curb and waited. Usually passengers come outside within a minute or two. Sometimes they message you saying they're on the way. But 5 minutes passed. Nothing. I checked the app. Still showed waiting for passenger. I figured maybe they had fallen asleep or ordered the ride by mistake. So I canceled and drove away. I didn't think about it again. Until a week later. It was almost the same time, around 1:40 in the morning, when another request came in. Same name, Michael B., and the pickup location. The exact same address. I actually laughed a little when I saw it. Guess someone keeps forgetting they ordered a ride, I muttered. I drove over again. The house looked exactly the same as before. Dark windows, no cars in the driveway, no lights. I waited for a couple minutes. Again, nobody came outside. That's when something strange happened. My phone buzzed with a message from the passenger. It simply said, "I'm here." I looked around the street. There was no one on the sidewalk, no one walking toward the car, no movement anywhere. I typed back, "Where are you?" The message showed as delivered, but there was no reply. At that point, I was starting to feel uneasy. I checked the house again. All the windows were dark, no lights inside. I even rolled down my window and looked up at the front door. Still nothing. Then the app sent the automatic message, "Passenger is waiting." That didn't make sense, because I was staring directly at the location marker, and there was no one there. After another minute, I canceled the ride again. As I pulled away, I glanced at the house in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw movement behind one of the windows, like someone had stepped back into the darkness. But it was so quick I couldn't be sure. I told myself it was just my imagination. Still, the whole thing stuck with me. 2 rides from the same person, same address, and both times, nobody there. I tried to forget about it, but the 3rd time it happened was when things really started to bother me. About 3 weeks later, I was driving near downtown when another request popped up. Before I even opened the notification, I had a weird feeling. When I checked the details, my stomach dropped. Passenger name, Michael B., pickup location. That same house. At that point, curiosity got the better of me. Instead of canceling, I decided to drive over again. The street looked even darker than usual that night. A storm had passed through earlier, and the pavement was still wet, reflecting the dim streetlights. I parked in the same spot as before, and just like the last 2 times, no one came outside. But this time, I decided to get out of the car. I walked up the short path leading to the house. The place looked abandoned, paint peeling off the siding, mailbox leaning to one side. And when I looked through the front window, I could barely see inside. It was completely empty. No furniture, no lights, nothing. I knocked on the door anyway. The sound echoed strangely inside the house. No response, just silence. I walked back toward my car, feeling uneasy. That's when an older man from the house next door stepped out onto his porch. He had a flashlight in his hand and was staring at me. "Can I help you?" he asked. I explained that I was a rideshare driver, and someone kept requesting rides from that address. The man frowned. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "That house has been empty for years. Do you know who Michael B. is?" I asked. He thought for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Michael Bennett." "What about him?" The man shifted his weight and looked back at the dark house. He lived there. Past tense. "What do you mean?" The neighbor sighed. "Michael died in that house about 12 years ago." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I glanced back at the empty house. Cold air moved through the trees, making the branches creak softly. Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down at the screen. The Rideshare app displayed a new message from the passenger. "Where are you?" I immediately canceled the ride and got back into my car. As I drove away, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. For just a second, I thought I saw someone standing on the sidewalk in front of the house, right where my car had been parked. A tall figure in the shadows, watching my car disappear down the street. The passenger who wouldn't get out. My name is Lauren. I'm 24, and I live in Portland, Oregon. A couple of years ago, when I was still in college, I didn't own a car. Portland has decent public transportation, but late at night, it's not always the safest or most reliable option. So whenever I worked a late shift or stayed out too long with friends, I usually just ordered a rideshare. Most of my rides were completely normal. Quiet drivers, short conversations about the weather, maybe the radio playing softly in the background. But there was one ride that still bothers me whenever I think about it. It happened on a Saturday night after a friend's birthday party downtown. I wasn't drunk, but I was definitely tired. It was already close to 1:30 in the morning when I finally stepped outside the bar and opened the Rideshare app. The driver accepted my request almost immediately. His name on the app was Eric, and his rating was almost perfect. The car listed was a silver Toyota Camry. When the car pulled up, everything matched the app exactly. Same license plate, same vehicle. Eric seemed like a normal guy, maybe in his late 30s. He smiled politely when I got in. "Lauren?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "That's me." "All right, we'll be there in about 15 minutes." The ride started off completely normal. We drove through downtown streets still full of people leaving bars and restaurants. Music from somewhere down the block drifted through the open windows, and the sidewalks were crowded with people laughing and shouting. After a few minutes, the city noise faded behind us. The streets got quieter as we moved into residential neighborhoods. Eric didn't talk much, but that didn't bother me. I actually prefer quiet rides. I leaned my head back and watched the streetlights pass by outside the window. Everything felt routine until we reached my street. I lived in a small apartment building near a park. The driver slowed down and pulled up right in front of the entrance. "We're here," he said. "Thanks," I replied, already reaching for the door handle. But something strange happened. The door didn't open. I pulled the handle again. Still locked. At first, I assumed the automatic lock system hadn't disengaged yet. "Hey," I said casually. "I think the door's still locked." Eric didn't respond. He just sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. I tried the handle again. Nothing. That's when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. Eric was staring straight ahead, but his eyes looked unfocused, almost like he wasn't actually looking at the road. Excuse me," I said. Still no response. A strange tension filled the car. The engine was idling softly, and I could hear the faint ticking sound of the turn signal still blinking from when he pulled over. I leaned forward slightly. "Eric," he finally blinked, slowly. Then he looked at me through the mirror, but something about his expression made my stomach tighten. He looked confused, like he had just woken up from a deep sleep. "Where are we?" he asked quietly. I stared at him. "You just drove me home," I said. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he turned his head and looked around the street like he'd never seen it before. "That's not possible," he said. "What do you mean I don't remember driving here?" I laughed nervously. Very funny. But Eric wasn't smiling. He looked genuinely shaken. "I mean it," he said. "The last thing I remember is picking you up downtown." My chest tightened. "Eric, we've been driving for 15 minutes. He shook his head slowly. "That doesn't make sense." The silence that followed felt incredibly heavy. Finally, he reached over and unlocked the doors. The sound of the locks clicking open felt louder than it should have. I opened the door immediately and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The cool night air felt strangely comforting. I leaned down towards the window. "You might want to take a break or something," I said. Eric nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe." I walked toward my apartment building, but right before I reached the entrance, something made me turn around. Eric's car was still parked there, but he wasn't inside anymore. The driver's seat was empty. The headlights were still on. The engine was still running. But the car door was closed, and Eric was nowhere in sight. I stood there staring for several seconds before finally going inside. I never reported the ride or contacted the company. At the time, I convinced myself it had just been a strange misunderstanding. But a few days later, when I opened the Rideshare app to check my ride history, that trip wasn't listed. It was like it had never happened at all. The GPS took me somewhere that didn't exist. My name is Victor. I'm 35 and I live just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I've been driving for a rideshare app on and off for about 4 years. Mostly nights because my day job is construction, and evening rides help cover things like my truck payment and my daughter's school expenses. Most of the time, the job is pretty simple. Pick someone up, follow the GPS, drop them off, repeat. The GPS is basically the most important part of the job. You trust it without really thinking about it. It tells you where to go, and you go. Until the night mine led me somewhere that shouldn't have existed. It was a Sunday night in late November. Cold, quiet, the kind of night where the roads feel empty after about 10 o'clock. I had been driving for a few hours and was about ready to head home when a ride request came through around 11:45 p.m. The passenger's name was Allison. The pickup location was downtown near a small restaurant strip. When I pulled up, a woman stepped out from the sidewalk and got into the back seat. She looked to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing a long coat and holding a small purse. "Hi," she said politely. "Evening," I replied. "Allison." "That's me." The ride looked pretty straightforward. About 25 minutes outside the city, somewhere in a rural area. I've taken plenty of passengers out into quieter areas before, so it didn't seem unusual. We started driving. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt completely normal. Allison spent most of the ride looking down at her phone, occasionally glancing out the window. I had the radio playing quietly, and the GPS voice gave its usual calm instructions. Continue for 6 miles. We passed the city limits and the streetlights gradually became less frequent. The road stretched out ahead of us, dark except for my headlights. Eventually, the GPS instructed me to turn onto a smaller road. That's when things started to feel different. The road was narrow, lined with trees on both sides. No houses, no streetlights. Just long stretches of darkness, broken occasionally by mailboxes near gravel driveways. I glanced at the GPS again. The destination was still about 5 minutes away. Allison hadn't said much during the ride, but after a while she leaned forward slightly. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just a few more minutes." Another turn came up ahead. The GPS said, "Turn left." But when I slowed down and looked around, there wasn't a road there. Just a dirt clearing and a narrow path leading into the woods. I frowned. "That's weird," I muttered. "What is Allison?" asked. "The GPS says to turn here, but this doesn't look like a road." She leaned forward to look at my phone screen. "It says we're almost there." That didn't make sense, because the map showed a house icon about 50 feet ahead of us, but there was nothing there except trees. Still, sometimes rural addresses can be strange, so I carefully pulled the car into the clearing. My headlights illuminated a patch of dirt surrounded by tall trees. No driveway, no house, no lights, nothing. The GPS voice spoke again. "You have arrived." Allison and I both looked out the windshield. She frowned. "That's not my house." "You're sure this is the right address?" I asked. "Yeah, I've been there before." I looked down at the GPS again. Then something strange happened. The map suddenly zoomed out. The screen flickered. And for a split second, the road we had just driven down disappeared from the map entirely. Then the screen went black. My phone had completely lost signal. At that exact moment, Allison's phone buzzed. She looked down at it. Her face changed immediately. "What is it?" I asked. She turned the screen toward Mel. It was a text message from an unknown number. 3 words. "You found it." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The forest around us was completely silent. Then, somewhere behind the car, I heard the faint sound of gravel crunching. Like another vehicle had just pulled into the clearing. I slowly checked my rearview mirror. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then, in the darkness beyond my headlights, 2 dim shapes appeared. Headlights. A car had stopped behind us, but the strange thing was, the lights weren't on. Whoever was sitting in that car was just parked there in the dark, watching us. Allison whispered from the back seat, "Victor, please drive." I didn't argue. I immediately shifted into reverse and backed out of the clearing as fast as I could. The tires kicked up dirt and gravel while I turned the car around. As I accelerated back onto the road, I glanced once in the mirror. The other car was still sitting there, completely dark. It didn't follow us, but the entire ride back toward the highway. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had accidentally driven somewhere we were never meant to find. And even stranger than that, when I checked my trip history later that night, the ride to Allison's address didn't appear in the app at all. It was like the GPS had taken us to a place that wasn't supposed to exist. The passenger who knew my name. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 34, and I've been driving rideshare in San Antonio, Texas for about 1.5 years. I started doing it after getting laid off from my previous job. At first, it was just temporary, but it turned out to be a decent way to make money while figuring out what to do next. Driving late nights was usually the best for earnings. Airport runs bar pickups. People getting home from parties, the rides were steady. and most passengers were friendly enough. But there was one ride that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. It happened on a Wednesday night in early summer. The streets were unusually quiet that night. I remember noticing how empty downtown looked for the middle of the week. It was around 12:40 a.m. when a ride request popped up on my phone. The passenger's name on the app was Robert. The pickup location was near an old office building a few blocks from the Riverwalk. When I pulled up, a man was already standing on the sidewalk waiting. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. Gray hair, tall, wearing a long, dark coat, even though it was warm outside. He opened the back door and got in. "Good evening," he said calmly. "Evening," I replied. Before I could confirm his name, he spoke again. "Daniel Wright." The way he said it caught my attention immediately. Passengers sometimes know your name because it appears in the app, but there was something about the way he said it that felt different. Still, I didn't think much of it at the time. "Yeah," I said. "That's me." The GPS displayed the destination. About 15 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I didn't usually drive through. We started heading out of downtown. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound inside the car was the quiet hum of the engine and the occasional GPS instruction. Then the man spoke again. "You drive nights often?" "Most nights," I said. "It's a lonely job sometimes." I chuckled a little. "Yeah, it can be." He leaned slightly forward from the back seat. "But you meet interesting people, don't you?" I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was smiling faintly. "I guess so," I said. The conversation went quiet again. After a few minutes, he spoke once more. "You should be careful driving so late." That comment felt strange. "Why's that?" I asked. He looked out the window as we passed under a streetlight. There are things on the road at night that most people never notice. I laughed awkwardly. "You mean drunk drivers?" He didn't laugh. "No," he said quietly. "I mean things that watch." I felt a small chill run down my spine. The car grew quiet again. The GPS announced the next turn. "Turn right in 200 feet. We turned onto a narrow residential street lined with old houses. "Almost there," I said. But when I checked the GPS again, something odd caught my attention. The destination marker had disappeared. The map just showed the road we were currently on. "That's strange," I muttered. "What is?" the man asked. "The address just disappeared." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "That's okay. We're already where we need to be." Before I could respond, he leaned forward slightly. "Pull over here." We were in the middle of a dark residential block. No houses with lights on. No people outside. Just rows of quiet homes and parked cars. I slowed down and pulled to the curb. The man opened the door and stepped out. Before closing it, he leaned down slightly and looked at me through the open window. "You should head home now, Daniel." "Why?" I asked. He smiled again. "Because the road is about to get crowded." Then he closed the door and walked down the sidewalk. I sat there for a moment, confused. Then I looked down at my phone to end the ride, but the screen didn't show an active trip. In fact, it didn't show any trip at all. There was no record of picking up a passenger named Robert. No destination. Nothing. Just the map. I sat there staring at the screen for a few seconds before slowly looking up. The man was gone. completely. The sidewalk was empty. I drove home immediately after that. But the strangest part of the whole experience didn't happen until later that night. Around 2 a.m., I opened the Rideshare app again, just to double-check my trip history. Still nothing. That ride never appeared. But before I closed the app, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. At the top of the screen was a notification message. It simply read, "Drive safely tonight, Daniel." The strange thing was, the app had never sent me a message like that before. Someone followed me home. My name is Aaron. I'm 29, and I live in a suburb outside Chicago. I started driving for a rideshare app about 2 years ago, after my hours were cut at my main job. Like a lot of drivers, I usually worked the late shift, because that's when the most rides came in. Most nights were predictable. You'd get bar pickups, airport runs, maybe someone heading home from a late shift at a restaurant or hospital. The rides blurred together after a while, but there was one passenger I can't stop thinking about. It happened last winter sometime in January. I remember the roads were icy that night, and business was slow because people didn't want to go out in the cold. Around 1:50 a.m., I received a ride request from a neighborhood about 10 minutes away. The passenger's name in the app was Evan. When I pulled up to the pickup location, a man was already standing on the sidewalk. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a dark jacket and gloves. His hands were stuffed in his pockets like he'd been waiting out there for a while. He opened the rear door and slid into the back seat. "Aaron?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "That's me. Thanks for coming out this late." "No problem." The destination was about 20 minutes away in another residential area on the opposite side of town. We started driving. At first, the ride felt completely normal. Evan was quiet, but not in a creepy way. Just the kind of quiet you get with tired passengers. After a few minutes, he spoke. "You ever get nervous driving strangers around this late?" I shrugged. "Not really. Most people just want to get home." He chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess that's true." The rest of the ride was mostly silent. Occasionally, I could see him in the rearview mirror, staring out the window at the snow-covered streets. About 20 minutes later, we reached the destination. It was a quiet neighborhood, with long driveways and tall trees lining the road. Most of the houses had their lights off. "Here we are," I said. Evan leaned forward slightly to look out the windshield. "This is fine," he said. I pulled over near the curb. He opened the door and stepped out. "Thanks for the ride," he said. "Have a good night," I replied. He shut the door and walked toward one of the houses. I waited a moment to make sure the ride ended properly in the app, then drove away. Nothing about the ride seemed unusual, at least not at first. But about 5 minutes later, while I was driving back toward the highway, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights. That wasn't unusual by itself, but the car had been behind me for several turns. Left turn, right turn, another right. The headlights stayed the same distance behind me the entire time. At first, I assumed it was just another driver heading the same direction. But when I turned onto a smaller road that led toward my neighborhood, the car turned too. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I glanced at the mirror again. The headlights looked strangely familiar. Something about the shape of the car, the way the front grille reflected the streetlights. Then it hit me. The car behind me looked exactly like the one I had just dropped Evan off from. Same model, same color. My stomach tightened. That didn't make sense. I had watched Evan walk up toward a house, but now a car identical to his was following me through nearly empty streets. I decided to test something. At the next intersection, I made a sudden left turn. The car behind me turned left too. I drove another block and made a right. The headlights followed again. Now I knew something was wrong. My heart started pounding. Instead of heading home, I drove toward a brightly lit gas station that stayed open 24 hours. As I pulled into the lot, the car behind me slowed down. For a moment, I thought it might pull in too, but instead, it drove past the entrance and continued down the road. I sat there for a few minutes trying to calm down. Eventually, I convinced myself it was probably just a coincidence. After about 10 minutes, I drove home. Nothing unusual happened the rest of the night. But 3 days later, something strange occurred. Around 2:13 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just one of those random moments where you wake up in the middle of the night. I rolled over and glanced toward the window beside my bed. And that's when I saw it. Headlights. A car was parked across the street. The engine was running because I could see faint exhaust drifting into the cold air. At first, I assumed it was just someone dropping off a neighbor, but the car didn't move. It stayed there, perfectly still, for several minutes. Something about it made me uneasy. So I got out of bed and walked to the window. When I looked more closely, my stomach dropped. It was the same car, same shape, same color. The same one that had followed me 3 nights earlier. I watched from the window for nearly 10 minutes. The headlights stayed on. The engine kept running, but no one got out. Finally, the car slowly pulled away and disappeared down the street. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the next night, it came back, 2:13 a.m. Same car, same spot. Same silent engine running in the dark. And the worst part, when I finally worked up the nerve to step outside and look inside the car, the driver's seat was empty. Rideshare apps make modern life easier. With just a few taps on a screen, we can get a ride across the city from someone we've never met before. Most of the time, those rides are ordinary, quiet trips home after work, late-night rides from the airport, or quick drives across town. But as these stories show, sometimes the road at night can feel very different. A passenger who disappears without explanation. A ride request from someone who may not even be alive anymore. A GPS leading to a place that shouldn't exist. Or a car waiting silently outside your house long after the ride is over. Maybe every one of these stories has a logical explanation. Or maybe some rides are meant to stay unexplained. If you've ever had a strange or unsettling experience while driving or riding in a rideshare, feel free to share it. Stories like these often come from ordinary people who simply had one night they'll never forget. And if you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out the channel for more real-life horror experiences shared by listeners just like you. Until next time, stay safe on the road.